Ok. J'ai le feu vert. Good night. I've been asked to give this conference in English, so I'll try it. Let's go. I would like to invite you to think about the geometry, the shape by which you get the world into concepts. And those concepts are necessary to simply be able to think. The main problem we have with nature is that what we call nature is changing, human included. We are supposed, as a scientist, we are supposed to produce concepts to be able to understand what is around us and to be able to speak, simply to elaborate a language. But our concepts contain things that are always changing, and they don't wait for you for change, they change. So there are different ways to manage the tension between changing things in one side and the necessity of stability for language on the other side. And in Western cultures, we have already negotiated. The negotiation is already made. This guy, you can see, he's changing. He has changed, obviously. And by naming this entity with the same word, we already decided what to favor. We favor stability. We call him Michel Simon. He's a French actor. For those of you who knows well European movies, he's a French actor, and I can guarantee that there is no single common atom between the step at 17 years old on the left and the step at 75 years old on the right. There is no common atom. He has changed all his atoms, and we still give the same name to this thing, or to this guy, if you prefer. Okay, you would say, oh, there is a relationship between the step at 17 years old and the step at the 17 years old, so 75 years old, sorry. There is a relationship, it is his memory. For sure, this person has a memory of what he was when he was 17 years old. But memory is changing. You know it very well. You are humans. You know that what we call memory is not stable because it's an emerging property from the activity of your brain. And your brain is made of atoms that are changing. So the real world natural history is supposed to explain is a changing world, including in the human constitution and including human societies that are changing. So we are always obliged to negotiate between stability of words and the permanent change of what we're trying to designate. In the history of natural history, I'm a professor at the Natural History Museum in Paris. And I am interested in the history of my own scientific discipline. During the history of what we call the natural history, there were two ways to manage this tension between necessity of stability for language and the change. First of all, on the right, Linus, the famous Swedish botanist, things were really more or less simple for him, because he considered that the categories we produce on nature is just recovering pre-existing idea of creation. The categories by themselves do exist in nature. This is what we call idealism. And when he looks at those ladybugs here, he sees only one thing. He doesn't pay much attention about the differences in color at the surface of each of those ladybugs. He just decides to consider each of these animals as a member or a kind of each of these animals are referring to a type, and this type is created directly from God's plan of creation. So what we call variation within the species is just considered as a corruption from matter of God's plan of creation. So Linné sees only one thing here in the 18th century. Sorry, 18th century. For Darwin, on the left, it is the contrary. He sees 24 things. There is no type. He sees 24 things. And what is real is not the category you're doing by trying to name those ladybugs. What is real is a change. What is real are individuals. This is nominalism philosophy. Nominalism. Each of those individuals just represent themselves. They are not members of a type by themselves. So there is only 1 century difference between these two great, I wouldn't say biologists, but naturalists. The relationship between the stability of our language and the changing things are just an important topic to understand that we are creating our concepts and we are naming nature. But using what geometry? What kind of... J'entends pas ce que vous dites. Ah, ne pas tenir le micro. Ok, c'est trop fort. Too loud. So there are different kind of operations you're doing when you're trying to organize nature in your mind, including the position of humans among nature. First of all, I will use the verbs to separate. The verb to separate is radically different as the verb to group, or together, if you prefer. When you are sorting out nature, when you're sorting out material at the primary school, you are acting with the verb separate. There is a limit that crossing your sample, and whatever the criterion by which you separate, you avoid to name what is on the right and what is on the left. Because if you name what is on the right and what is on the left, you will create a concept based on a separation, a privation, if you prefer, an exclusion, if you prefer. When you group, the difference between the two verbs are very important. When you group, you are obliged to point out at least a common property to the member of the group you're doing. What we call classifying is making groups. And what I call a classification is making concept positively defined. Positively meaning that for each group you have identified at least one property shared by the member of the group. When you separate a sample, you don't create concepts. You're just making a decision. You are using a key just to be able to make a path or make a decisions to get a name of a plant or an animal. You're using what we call an identification key. It is made of successive separations, not groups actually. And to assign is a third verb, easy to understand. When you are making your bedroom in order, you put things at the right place, things with similar things. The place where they are supposed to be are already defined. The group is already made. You're just assigning an object to a group. Those three operations seems very easy to understand, but I can guarantee you that is not easy. When you go to primary school and you try to make the real world into order in the kid's mind, The first step, the very first step, is to make sure that by sorting out or by separating, the kids are not creating groups. This confusion between separating and grouping is directly at the very origin of the way the humankind sees itself with reference to nature, because our major attitude in the Western countries is to consider the position of mankind in terms of separation from nature, not in terms of grouping. I will go more on this point a little bit later, but you understand where are the problems. If you classify nature according to correct rational groups made of positive properties, you would be invited to treat humankind the same way, simply the logic of your system, the consistency, the logical consistency of the system you're trying to make. Is it curious? As a scientist, I mean, I'm not speaking as a philosopher or a theologist or whatever else, but I'm speaking as a scientist. When you are classifying all living things according to a grouping procedure, why would you, for the humankind specifically, would you change the procedure and use the separation procedure? It's not the same procedure. You are obliged, in the middle, you are obliged to, I repeat myself, to specify the positive properties present in the member of the group. When you separate, you can make on the right things because they don't have what is on the left. You can create a group on the absence of a property. Otherwise, you can make any stupid group. I can put a wheel, a feather, a glass of water, a pair of glasses in a group, and I can always say that they don't have any skateboards. The list of what a group doesn't have is an infinite list. So you just can't make a group based on an absence of a property. Absence of a property is good for sorting out, is not good for creating groups. If we understand that, unfortunately for you, those mathematical figures in blue here, what we call a tree or a connex graph, is used sometimes to sort out material on the top, sometimes to classify on the bottom. So if you confuse the two procedures, you are pleased to see upstairs that the sea star and the snail are together, and you see, oh yeah, I get invertebrates. Invertebrates, oh, animals that do not have any vertebra. What do you say about a snail when you say it doesn't have any vertebra? You say nothing about the snail. You speak about man, actually. Invertebrates was created because we are vertebrates. We, humankind, are vertebrates. When you're using the concept of invertebrate, you don't speak about the snail or the starfish. You speak about man. So you have to pay attention about what is your concept made for. Do you try to classify nature to speak about man, or do you want to classify nature for itself? So this figure at the top is a kind of tree. It's a connect graph. But it's made here to sort out material, for instance, an identification key. I don't know if you know what is an identification key. It's just a path that you are able to borrow, where at some steps we ask questions. Does it have feathers, or does it have scales? And if it has feathers, you go to page 75, and if it has scales, you go to page 50, and so on. And step by step, you go to a more precise definition of the name of what you're trying to identify. In such a procedure, exclusions are good, are as efficient as well as positive properties. On the bottom, this tree is made for a classification. And if you classify, remember, you create concepts. On the top, you don't create any concepts. You're just using a path. But on the bottom, you are creating concepts, boxes in your mind. And those concepts, if they want to be scientific concepts, they have to be rational and efficient, you have to positively define your groups. So exclusions are not allowed in the figure at the bottom. This is really basic, basic training of classification. But the confusion is really, really spread. The confusion is everywhere, even in school books. This is a figure in French, but you can't read it from over there. Forget it. It's just to show that even in common journals, this is taken from a daily journal. It is called classification, but if you look at the criteria by which the kid is supposed to recognize animals or plants, it is not classification, it is just sorting out. So the confusion is really spread. If you want a rich system of creating words and concepts, I would recommend to use what I call a hierarchy, but hierarchy by nested sets. Your sets are nested within each other. It is really, I will go further on this a few minutes later. Those nested sets are really rich because the properties by which you are included in the least inclusive set doesn't make any problem for having properties more widely shared at a higher level. In other words, what makes you a human is not a contradiction with what makes you an animal, because humans and animals are not boxes of the same size, and the box humans is within the box animals. So there is no contradiction with this system between being an animal and being a human. You will understand better a few minutes later. Those nested sets can be drawn using red lines like this. You just draw a line between the set of the n level. You join the set of the n level to the set of the n+1 level, and you get a tree. This is the reason why we classify nature using trees, because trees create complete boxes. And we need boxes to name things at any level of sharings, at any level of shared characters or shared features. So let's go now on the properties you need for rational and scientific efficient categories. I will just speak about science. I'm just speaking about science. What I'm trying to explain here or to recommend is not necessarily for arts or not necessarily for philosophy, not necessarily for your human brain activity expresses itself in many fields of knowledge. This is what I'm trying to recommend for a scientific explanation or scientific conceptualization of what we see. First of all, efficient properties in science, I mean mineralogy, zoology, botany, geology, and so on, natural sciences. You get more information, I told you just 1 minute before, by nested set hierarchy. Hierarchy is not an easy word. You speak about, maybe you could think about a kind of pile with the worst at the bottom and the best at the top. This is not that hierarchy I'm speaking about. I'm just speaking about a hierarchy in terms of the way common features are shared. Nested sets of smaller size are defined by properties that are shared by a small number of entities, and the bigger set defined by a feature shared by a wider or bigger number of entities. It's just including the preceding one. It's just a hierarchy of nested sets. So you would avoid what I call the old school classification without hierarchy. This is what sometimes kids learn at school. You have mammals, you have reptiles, you have birds, you have amphibians. And what are the characteristics that are shared? You have sorry, j'ai une panne d'anglais. You have, comment vous dites les poils déjà? Oui, c'est ça. Pardon? Merci, thank you. You have hairs on mammals, okay? You have scales on reptiles, you have feathers on birds, and nothing on the skin of amphibians. So the world seems to be simple, but when you are a teacher, the kids sometimes ask you, but what are you doing with the birds? Because, okay, the birds have feathers, but the kids notice that birds have scales on their toes. So why don't you put the birds into reptiles? So you know, this kind of separation without hierarchy is not powerful enough to explain what happens in nature. And the kids could ask you, why don't you put the birds into reptiles? It has scales. Remember, look at the toes of any bird outside. You will see it has scales. This system is used, for instance, for the classification of atoms. There are sets that are made, but they are not nested within each other. They are just neighbors. You would also avoid, if you want to have a rich system of creating concepts, you would avoid what I call a stacking hierarchy. Because those stacking hierarchy are made according to a single axis. It's not rich enough. Most of the time, the reason why you go from the blue or the green to the orange is because, okay, there is a property that was born at the bottom of the green line, but this property is lost. It's supposed to be lost in the upper box. So those boxes sometimes are created by a privation of a property. It is what we have in the stratigraphic stacking hierarchy. Have you heard about stratigraphy? You have a property that is useful to define the basement of the period. But there is something new at the upper level of the period that makes the limit. And what is new is a privation of what is below. So it's not really the same thing as a hierarchy by nested sets. This single axis hierarchy is the one used for the scale of nature. Have you heard about the scale of nature? It goes back to Aristotle, but it went back in the Middle Age. And at the right of this figure, you have a version of 1745 under the pen of the botanist Charles Bonnet. And you have a stacking hierarchy with the least perfect to the most perfect. It's a hierarchy in terms of value. We go to the least perfect to the most perfect. And obviously, Leibniz, but not only Leibniz, also Charles Bonnet says that the humankind is at the top because it's God's creation. And above the man, you have the angels. And in the Middle Age version, above the man, you have the angels on the left, and above the angels, you have the paradise. It is a castle you can see on the cloud. So this scale of nature is a theological item that was taken in natural history during the 17th and 18th century. And this is the way we continue to think about the place of humankind in nature, especially for French-speaking philosophers. The major cultural item used to place mankind into nature is a cut along a single axis. It's not a hierarchy using nested sets. It's a cut. You see this figure. This figure is an evolutionary symbol or item. The single axis here in Charles Bonnet doesn't mean any evolution. It's just from the least perfect to the most perfect. There is no evolution in it. But this single axis was taken back to the evolutionary thinking during the 19th century and 20th century. And we continue to think about nature along a single axis, even if we think evolution. This is not the way we should think, I mean, because evolution goes in any direction. It's like a tree with different tips, a huge amount of tips. There is no single tip, you know. So moreover, we used to consider this single axis in terms of cut. We are trying to over-define the humankind, and we neglect to define animals. When I say we, I mean those kind of French philosophers that are thinking about the place of humankind in nature. They think it in terms of cuts, in terms of exclusion, not in terms of nested sets. So if you give something to the chimpanzee, to the monkey, that previously was restricted to the only humankind, you are humiliating the humankind. If you say that chimpanzees have cultural abilities, if you say that they have technical traditions, if you say that they negotiate, they make war, they make love, they speak to each other in a certain way, if you say this kind of thing, this school of thinking is automatically redefining what is war, what is love, what is technical abilities, in order to preserve the unicity, the unique characteristic of the humankind. So there is a play all over in the journals. You can see there is a play with this cut is moving. When you give something along a single axis, when you give something to the ape or to a chimpanzee, it is felt as an humiliation for the humankind. So we redefine the thing so that we can keep the cut at the right place, you know. So it's not a game of a scientist in natural history. It's a game of philosophers. So I have to give you an example. Sorry, it's written in French. My example is among French philosophers. Luc Ferry was a Ministry of National Education in France 10 years ago. You see here what he wrote last year. When at the movie, you had the new version of the Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes, the fourth movie. It was in the journal Le Figaro magazine. Depuis des décennies maintenant, l'argument est devenu rituel. On trouverait chez nos cousins des embryons de tous les comportements les plus typiques des humains. Les règles sociales, morales, esthétiques, linguistiques, voire des rituels funéraires si proches des nôtres qu'il faudrait rabaisser notre caquet. Admettre enfin que nous sommes des animaux comme les autres, simplement un peu plus prétentieux et dévastateurs de la planète. Pour posséder une part de vérité, ce discours n'en est pas moins, en dernière instance, tout à fait fallacieux, car sur le plan éthique et scientifique, la différence reste et restera à jamais radicale. What does it mean? Luc Ferry favors what makes the difference between we and the apes. But this is not the way science works. If you make the list of difference between one object and one another, you will never be able to create a single concept because each individual is unique. If you are trying to grasp the complexity of what exists just by naming differences, you finish lonely, you finish just by yourself. And you could give a surname to each of your atoms, of each of your cells. You have no two cells identical. You have to know that. No cell are identical to another one in your own body. So if you do science, what we call identity, mathematical identity, doesn't exist in biology. Even not only in biology, the same for mineralogy or the same for geology. You think that a block of atoms or mineral is identical to another. No, there are isotopes in this block of matter. Matter is defined by its own change. The way from the Greek antiquity, we define matter by the fact that it's changed. So if you define things just by difference, you just give a surname to each atom, and you can construct any efficient concept to understand what you're trying to name. So this kind of reasoning is just made for making humankind as the big exception of nature. And you have a list of differences in the following of the paper. Y a-t-il sur Terre un seul grand singe pour se soucier du sort des enfants frappés par le virus Ebola en Afrique ou torturés en Syrie? Évidemment non, rien ne laisse penser que cette situation dissymétrique puisse un jour changer. You can always find differences. Okay, those differences are completely stupid, I admit. But you can always be able to find differences. The most difficult task you have, if you want to understand nature, is to point out things that are shared. Common traits, common features, not differences. You always find differences. So it makes no sense. So playing this game about this cut, just forward or just backwards, it seems simply, useless, or it doesn't help you if you want to have a scientific explanation of what exists. For philosophy, it's something else, but for scientists, it's useless. Trees are good because they are not based on differences. They are based on clustering. You are grouping things. You are not separating things. And in this figure, I can show you that what I call an animal is defined, and what I call a humankind is defined. Everything is defined positively. In the previous figure, you had over-defined mankind and an undefined animal. They never define what an animal is, or what I call nature is. So those trees create what I call a hierarchy of nested sets. And each of the sets you see is defined by a property. Chlorophylls. There is something written in the red box, but you don't see it, I think. It is because the image is changed. I have written in the red box parallel toes. Parallel toes, your big toes, is parallel to the other toes. It is a specifically human feature. It makes you a human. You agree, I like it. Because most of the time people would prefer to have, you have the ability to have an articulated language, or one kind of intelligence. I don't know what of this kind, but we have many anatomical specificities, and the fact that you are an animal by having collagen is not contradictory to the fact that you have a parallel toes. We all have a series of features that were gained through the history of life at different moments. So this is the reason why this nested hierarchy is good for describing biological bodies according to their history. Properties for rational and efficient categories, you will try to get what I call hierarchical consistency. In other words, we should avoid partially overlapping groups. It is obvious, I mean. Look at this. If you take part of a group, and a part of a second group, not all, and part of the third group, not all, and you make a group with this, you create a group that is partially overlapping the previous ones. This is what I call hierarchy inconsistency. The best example I have for this is the Organization of French Research. Have you heard about UMR, Unité Mixte de Recherche? Units of research paid by the CNRS. We take a part of an institution, not all. We take a part of a second institution, not all, and a third one, and we make a group with this, and we call that UMR. And the money arrives by this way. It's a little bit complicated, you know. Foreigners often feel some unease to understand how French research works. So if you are trying to make an efficient system of a rational system of concepts, you will avoid those kind of hierarchical inconsistency. I would prefer to have monothetic groups. What is a monothetic group? It's a group defined by at least one property that is shared by all members of the group. You can find sometimes polythetic groups. Polythetic, it means that there are properties shared by members of the group, but not all. And there is no property that is common to all members of the group. A monothetic group is easier to manage for our minds. You would like a property to be present in all members of the group. Make groups with a single purpose. It is very important. It was one of the main tensions of the history of systematics of the 20th century. When Charles Darwin, for instance, proposed to create groups by common origin, according to a common origin, you will make in the single groups animals or plants because they have a common origin, a unique origin. We were not able to do that right from the beginning, so it took 1 century to be able to do that, so it was long, and between that century, we mixed different purposes in our classification. We wanted to classify according to what organisms do, and we also wanted to classify organisms according to what they have or where they live. And you know, it's very complicated because what they do does not reflect always what they have and does not reflect where they live. So by doing this, we go to lack of consistency of our classification systems. Charles Darwin in 1859 proposed a purpose for classification of living things. The natural system, it means the classification itself. In the 13th chapter of The Origin of Species, the natural system is founded on descent with modification. Organisms are along a genealogy. They are producing a genealogy, and through times, generations change. So descent, it means that there is a genealogy, and this genealogy is made of changing individuals. Characters which naturalists consider as showing true affinity between any two or more species are those which have been inherited from a common parent. Oh, interesting. We are classifying on what they have, because what they have is the best way to get an image or a reflect of common parents. The purpose of the classification is genealogy. We put in the same group organisms because they have the same origin. So, insofar, all true classification is genealogical. That community of descent is a hidden bond which naturalists have been unconsciously seeking, and not some unknown plan of creation. I should say that Darwin is not at war against creation. It's just referring here to Linné. The preceding classification agenda was created by Linné, and Linné explicitly referred to God at the time. It was 1 century before. So here, the purpose for classification is just changing. See, okay, it's not a matter of God. God now is outside science. Science got its autonomy with regard to the theological power or discourse. It's just a matter of genealogy now. The origin of things is genealogy. You know this famous figure. If you want to understand how to get common ancestry, you have today you get just organisms at the top, and this is a theoretical genealogy. What they have is the best at the top, is the best reflect of what they gain from their ancestors, common ancestors. This is the reason why we don't classify on what organisms do, because what they do not always reflect what they have. You know, this fly is flying, this duck is flying, but they fly with completely different things. So we can do the same thing with completely different organs. So if you want to have an image of the ancestors, don't look at what they do, you just look at what they have. This is what I kind of classificatory agenda. And any classification, whatever the science you are in, any classification is conventional. You have to get a convention about what are you trying to classify, why are you trying to classify, and what are the properties you are privileging in your classification. So this is the reason why we classify today nature, or living things, I should say, according to what they have in common, because it is the reflection of the origins, actually, genealogical origins. But during the century that separates mid-19th century and mid-20th century, we were not always really so self-consistent, and we are sometimes classified according to what they did and not what they have. And worse, even worse, we sometimes classify according to what they didn't do. Even worse, a privation of. Ernst Mayr in 1972 was trying to promote reptiles against birds and said there is a gap between reptiles and birds because reptiles didn't learn to fly. The gap in red here you see, it is what they called an adapted jump, or an adaptive gap. Reptiles were put apart because they didn't fly. In spite of the fact that there is a common branch, you can see on this figure, there is a common branch between the crocodile and the birds, meaning that crocodiles and birds have common ancestor exclusive to them. There are dinosaurs in the middle. I have not put the fossils here, but there are many dinosaurs in between. So forget the dinosaur for the moment. Just keep in mind that in the extant animals, crocodiles are more closely related to birds than they are related to lizards. So in spite of that fact, crocodiles were put into reptiles because reptiles didn't fly. So you have to make choices. What do you want in your system? Do you want to classify according to common ancestry, so that crocodiles should be with birds into the archosaurs? Or do you want to classify according to what they do in ecology, and you would prefer reptiles against birds? We never... it took a century to be able to make a decision, because we were trying to get several purposes, and purposes that were incompatible to each other. In French, we call that courir plusieurs lièvres à la fois. When you run after several rabbits, you get no one. You get no rabbits at all. So, also, you will prefer to produce complete groups. What is a complete group? It's really simple to understand. If you are making a group according to a property that all the members of the group share. Okay, it's correct. You wouldn't be allowed, or you will be or I will be very surprised if you would leave outside the groups some entities that have the property, that has the property. For instance, let's consider the concept of fish. Fish is defined on the fact that it has a skull. At the very origin of fishes, you were the rise of the skull. It was something like 600 million years ago. So, okay, every fish has a skull. There is no exception. Every fish has a skull. No problem with that. So, the problem with that is you left animals with skulls outside fishes. We have the skull. All the tetrapods have a skull. The cow has a skull, the cat has a skull, the dog has a skull. You have to know that one of the reasons why fish is not a valid concept in zoology today, it is just because it comes from the kitchen. It doesn't come from science. The rule of classifying things at the kitchen are not the same as the rule classifying things at the lab. And it's even not the same as the rules for classifying things when you're an ecologist. When you're an ecologist, you will need a concept based on what organisms do, not necessarily on what they have. In zoology, you will need a concept about what they have, not necessarily what they do. So according to the place where you are creating several kinds of concepts that are made purposefully for a certain aim. This is why all classifications are conventional. But this is not really a problem. The problem is using a classification in the wrong way, in the wrong sector. I wouldn't say actinopterygians at the fish shop or at the restaurant. It would be stupid, I mean. So we don't use any fish concept in zoology anymore. And you have to know why. The group is incomplete. There is no single exclusive characters defining fishes. So we don't use the term fishes anymore. No cuts. No cuts. Fish is a cut. Fish is animals with a cranium, with a skull, okay. But part of the animals having a cranium are not in fish because the group was cut. There were fishes are vertebrates that were not be able to walk on land. Who is the group? What is the group that works on land? Ours. It's like invertebrates. You understood very well invertebrates because the exclusion is within the etymology of the word. But fish, it sounds weird because when I say fish, there is no privation in the etymology. But it is a privative group. It is a cut group. Like invertebrates, world music. Oh, I'm going outside science now. Just to give you other examples, what I call world music, you will have the impression that it is the music of all the world. It is not. If you look precisely, it is not music of all the world. It is a music that are played in other continents as one of Western countries. The Rolling Stones or Mozart are not classified into world music, usually. Suburbs, overseas, extraterrestrial, they are rest of the world concepts. We try to avoid, in science, as I told you already, we try to avoid such concepts. So, the same way, fishes between 1895 and 1950, fishes were valid in zoology because we considered that there was an adaptive jump, being able to walk on land, what we call the major step. This school of thinking was looking at evolution in terms of major steps. I don't know what is a major step actually, because you know we perfectly know now that what we call walking was made at the bottom of the lakes or the sea far before being able to walk on land. fishes didn't go out of water. Water was removed periodically, but there is no sortie des eaux, you know, the scenario out of water. Kids at the school will ask you, you were explaining me that fishes are adapted to the life into water. Okay. Why would they have to walk on land? So just answer this question. It is a question of what we call a major step. Did Noé drink too much alcohol, or did fishes play baseball and the ball was on the river, so one of them had to go out and to get what did they have to go on land? I have a version for males of the room here. You know this coelacanth is attracted by a nice person trying to fish him. So you have to ask yourself why animals do those kind of adaptive jump. It's an epistemological failure, you understand that. It's excess of storytelling. There is obviously evolution leading vertebrates to colonize land, but they don't go out of the water. It's a kind of storytelling, you know. Those storytelling were used to maintain the difference between bubbles over there. You have to understand what is the impact of the storytelling into the way you shape your concepts, your classificatory concepts. The bubbles upstairs were created to explain that reptiles gave birth to birds and reptiles gave birth to mammals. You can see that groups are not nested into each other. Groups give birth to each other. There is a confusion between the property of the box and the property of the content of the box. The content of the box, there is an ancestor-descendant relationship concerning the content of the box. I agree with that. There is evolution. I agree with that, obviously. But the boxes themselves are created by us. The boxes do not descend from each other. The boxes should be nested within each other. So if I translate what I'm saying into direct sentences, birds do not descend from reptiles. Birds are reptiles. So the correct relation is not ancestor-descendant between the boxes. At the bottom, the figure here, you see that birds are reptiles. The box birds is nested within the box reptile. And the birds have the reptile features. They do have scales made with keratin. They have scales on their toes. Okay. So, you know, there are a number of things to continue to say about the way we classify nature and the way the human sees itself in the system. What I call a taxon, the concept I'm creating because it is made for understanding the geology, understanding the origin of what exists among living things. Those taxons are concepts. They are like a virtual box in your mind. It is an envelope. It is an envelope, a box if you prefer, justified by at least one exclusive property. I insist on the term exclusive. Exclusive means that the property by which you justify the box is not outside the box. Okay? So if I'm reasoning like that, we are fishes because we have the skull. So forget it because fishes have been removed from the zoological classification. But there are two solutions. Either you remove the concept or you change the content. If people would decide to keep the concept of fish, they should have put all tetrapods within fishes. This is what we do. This is what we did for reptiles. If you go to a modern classification textbook, you will see that paleontologists today have kept the concept of reptiles into their classification. Dinosaurs are members of the reptiles, and birds are members of the dinosaurs. So birds are reptiles. I repeat myself, they have reptile features, like the scales. The taxon is a virtual box. The contents of the box changes across time. I mean, if this box is the box dinosaur, it is defined at least by a feature, this kind of opening in the hind. This specific opening is a dinosaur signature. It's a character of dinosaur. You find it in any dinosaur of the Trias, the Jurassic, of the Cretaceous, and even of the dinosaurs of today. You still have this character in our birds today. So the content changes through time, through the geological times. And the content can change also through the history of knowledge. What I call a reptile at the beginning of the 20th century is not the same content as what I call a reptile today. Today, remember, the birds are within reptiles. It was not the case 1 century ago. Okay. So birds do not come from reptiles. Birds are reptiles. It is another box into the reptile box, if you prefer. So you can imagine the complexity of the change of thinking during the 20th century when we passed from the figure at the top, first half of the 20th century, to the figure at the bottom, second half of the 20th century. This 20th century was the very high time for systematics, the science for classification, because we made our procedures more clear in our minds, if you prefer, trying not to create groups by cuts or exclusion, just using an agglomerative procedure, I mean clustering procedures. In the figure of the top, groups were groups from Linné, from the old times of Linné, and people trying to search for the genealogical affinities between groups that were already created. They behaved as if the groups really exist into nature. It is the reason why I started with Darwin and Linné at the beginning. They were like Linné. They were thinking that groups were really existing. We are making groups. Groups do not exist by themselves. The features, the properties, the common features by which you justify group are really existing. Okay, there is something that exists outside there. I agree with you. Features, characters exist, but groups are created by us. So they took groups and they tried to find genealogical affinities among groups. At the figure of the bottom, it was completely the reverse. Groups do not exist a priori. You just have the things you have to classify. You search the relationships, who is sharing what with whom, among those entities you have to classify, who is sharing what with whom, and if this who is sharing what with whom is interpreted in terms of evolution, it is translated into whom is most closely related to whom in terms of genealogy. So then when you have what I call a phylogeny, who is closely related to whom, you create boxes afterwards. Boxes arrive at the end. Can you imagine the old generation at the lab thinking that boxes were right from the beginning, trying to speak to your young generation arriving at the lab thinking that boxes just arrive at the end of the process. They just couldn't work together. They were a completely reverse way of thinking about our concepts on nature. Add on this that it was a time when systematics didn't hire anybody anymore. It took something like 40 years. So there is a hole in the generation in the generation of those labs, in the demographic distribution of the lab, there is a big hole, because during 40 years we didn't hire anybody. So when the young arrived, trying to speak to the old ones were the old stupids, and the young ones were just young stupids. They all were stupids. La guerre entre les jeunes cons et les vieux cons, voilà, c'était ça. La chanson de Georges Brassens. So it was not easy. So to finish, you understood that if you consider the humankind not in terms of cuts, not along a single axis, where animal is undefined and where man tries to over-define himself, if you don't trying to if you're not using this kind of framework, you are able to be in peace, to live in peace with the fact that as a human, with any specificity you want to give to your humankind, there is no problem with being an animal at the same time, or being a vertebrate, or being a mammal. What is an animal? Okay, I gave you a definition for a common feature of the humankind. Parallel toes, okay. Language, okay. What is an animal? Collagen, a protein you have in your skin. Animals have a sac at the top of the head of the spermatozoid. This sac is called acrosome. This is a characteristic of animals. Animals have desmosomes. There are structures that attach cells together and make the tissue self-consistent. They have many structures in common in the genetic material. I would say, just looking at molecular phylogeny, when you look at sequences of any gene, you will find easily the animal cluster in any molecular phylogeny. There is no problem with that. So animals are defined as humans can be defined in the system, like I said. Just keep in mind that being a human is having gained characters of what we conventionally call a human. 4 to 5 million years ago, the parallel toe, the language. I wouldn't give a time for that, for a date, I don't know, really. But you have a large part of your anatomy is shared with a huge number of other species, just because those parts of your anatomy arrived at different moments of the biological evolution. So mankind is an anthropoid because you have a coccyx and not a tail. We are primates. 65 million years ago, we got the opposition of this finger, the first one, opposed to the other ones. This is one of the characters of the primates. We are mammals. We have hairs, and we got them a little bit more than 200 million years ago. We are tetrapods. We are 4 limbs, four members. And it was gained to 360 million years ago. We are gnathostomes. We have a jaw. It was gained 420 million years ago. We are vertebrates, and we are animals. You know it. And nothing of all these characters is a problem as with being a human. I mean, you are in a nested system. Okay, so I have finished with the geometry of the way we think ourselves into nature, and I am ready to answer your questions. Thank you.